Oh,
Hi.
panelist. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I just did my second dry run and it was basically flawless.
Yes.
Night
I'm
and
so
day
glad
compared to
to
dry
hear
run
that.
number one. Sorry?
I said I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. And like I didn't have speaker notes for like 70% of it. So I was like, oh, this is gonna be rough. But it actually went really well. So the problem is gonna be going back and making sure I capture the good things I said because I didn't record it. But it went really good.
Good, that's awesome. I looked at the schedule for the Animal Crossing day today, and that just looks so fun. Like that's what a neat idea.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be great. I'm just like I'm a little intimidated because I'm like, oh, there's all these people that I like already knew about and looked up to as speakers, and I'm after them. So
You've perceived them, love that.
yeah, but yeah, it went really well. I'm hoping to get the speaker notes done tonight, get them uploaded, and then they'll be available for accessibility purposes tomorrow as the conference starts.
Okay, cool. Love that initiative.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for jumping on, Katie, and good to see you, Jackie.
Hello.
So what I'm going to do, Eric, is I'm going to make you host. But as attendees start jumping in, I would just make sure that you go to the attendees bar and just click like allow people to talk so that they can interact with one another.
Absolutely, will do.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay, Eric, I am upgrading you to host. Okay, so you should have just gotten notified that you're the host.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Of course, so now when Mike joins, you'll be able to promote him to a panelist. And then as attendees join, you'll be able to allow them to talk.
Well, Eric, I expect my upgrade anytime soon here.
Oh, that's you, Mike. Oh, sorry, that's a
Yeah.
different name than I'm used to seeing.
Can I also change my name?
I was about to say, who is Tick Skipper?
No, I'm on the wrong account.
Oh,
I feel like there's probably a funny story behind that.
More or less that I have to log into multiple accounts on the same computer, and this is our work Zoom.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's our admin.
All switches around.
Can I change my name?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Nope, it is done. From now on, you are Tick Skipper.
Sweet.
Master of Ticket Hot Potato.
Oh, man. Well, team, I'm going to let you all take it from here. I'm going to jump off, but I will be available via Slack if anything comes up.
okay, sounds good. And I should also make the speakers panelists too, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And then also, if you do want to have like a more interactive meetup later on during the Q&A section, you're welcome to just promote anyone to be a panelist, as long as, like, what I would do after the meetup has started, if you're going to do that, is like lock the room. Which, Eric, I think if you press like the ellipses more, or maybe there's an arrow in your toolbar now, you should be able to lock the room maybe 30 minutes in or so. Just if you're going to allow everyone to share their video, that might be a good idea.
Okay, great.
But yeah, okay. Well, I'll be available on Slack if anything comes up. But I think you all got this.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Okay, talk soon.
All
Have a
right.
good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, Ilan. Let me promote you to panelist.
Okay.
Jackie, you don't have to be the DA on this. We are doing Q&A. Yeah.
Bamboozled again.
I like that name. That's funny.
Like if there's questions I can help with, I'll help. I'm just, like I said, my worry would just be that I'm gonna have like pre-conference irritation, and I don't want to like snap at anybody or come across wrong just because I'm restless. And
No, it's cool. Like you really don't have to just hang out. No one, what is it? I guess no one signed up or I didn't at least get a message from Katie. So no DAs today, but it's not a big deal. Can just make Cam or Joshua do it. So we'll pawn it off somewhere. Eric, I cannot change my name. I'm gonna have to leave and switch accounts, I think.
Nope, your ticks.
Your ticks.
On text.
Even if you come back, your ticks.
Also, I can't turn my video camera on. Like I have no options right now.
Yeah, I should do that.
Did you make me a panelist?
No, I can't verify you are who you are.
Can't change my name.
I will promote you to panelist.
Ah, there we go. Merci.
Oh, look, I was able to rename you.
Looking like, oh, this is off screen. Look at screen. Oh, it's not off screen.
All right. I know we're at 6 o'clock, but we're going to give folks a little more time to join.
Please. Oh, I need to share, don't I?
My audio, it's okay.
Yeah, your audio is great.
Podcasty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like your setup. So Ilan works where I work, and he has come up with a really cool like guideline of how to like set up your office and stuff, like everything from your chair to desks to microphone setup and such.
Super opinionated, but it works.
It sounds good. I need this guide, man.
Maybe that should be a blog post.
I think that's what we need to do, Eric. We need to invest in a caster setup. Get the microphones. Let's get all professional.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're giving attendees a little while longer to just join our hug today, but feel free to join in and chat. I am giving everyone the ability to talk.
I think Josh and Kevin and Cam need to be panelists.
Oh yeah, Josh and Cam are here. Yeah, I'll be happy to make them panelists.
Hey everyone.
Can you make Kevin Cochran a panelist too?
Oh yes,
Thank you.
I didn't forget you, Kevin, I promise. Anyone have any fun projects going on?
When you say fun, what do you mean?
I don't know. Interesting.
I'm I've been working on an album for the past, I guess, 15 years, but I think we're almost done with it.
Cool. What kind of music?
Good question. It's like indie pop, blues, and a little bit of like
A little bit of heavy metal.
90s punk.
Interesting.
It is a very interesting hodgepodge. That is correct.
Yeah.
I've been finishing out my basement.
Nice.
I was gonna say, last time I saw you still had some work to do. You're killing it, I bet.
I took a big long break, but then because of all this COVID stuff, my son who was up in Washington is now here, so I had to hurry up and slam a room together for him. So I'm like, while I'm at it, start running electricity, start hanging doors, start plugging up doors. It's yeah. I mean, after about the third door that I hung, I figured out what I did wrong with the first two. But you're screwed by that point. You know, got a zillion nails all the way up through. It's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Deal with it later.
Yeah, it's crazy.
All right, cool. Looks like we have a good bit of attendees. We're about 4 minutes after. So, Mike, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Share real quick. Oh. You see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah, cool. Everyone, thank you for coming. This is our new installment of the monthly HashiCorp user group. I am Michael Greenlaw. I'm a DevOps engineer at XPAP. I'm going to give you some updates today. So our next meeting, we are in the monthly cadence now. It's going to be Wednesday, May 27th. This will also be a virtual hug, assuming we're still in the coronavirus situation we're at now. And we would like to also call for hug speakers for topics in 2020. And if you would contact hugs@hashicorp.com for any HashiCorp related talks geared towards any level. Let's see. Also announce HashiCorp Digital. It's an interactive HashiCorp community experience. It's going to be virtual, and I believe hosted from the EU. It's going to be June 8th through 10th of this year. And then we also have a discount code for HashiConf US that is still happening in San Diego, California from October 13th to the 15th. And we have the promo code at the bottom there. And that's all the updates we have. I believe we're going to get straight into Ilan's talk about writing DevOps with Terraform. Along those lines, correct?
Pretty much.
Yeah, DevOps, writing good Terraform. Yeah, so Ilan, let me stop sharing and I'll let you take the reins here.
DevOps.
Yeah, DevOps.
Is it? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Did you notice I changed your title on the slide to DevOps engineer?
That is a good one. Okay, you should be able to see VS Code.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So I did something different this time where I put the whole presentation as code, basically. So everything's in this repo. I can link it in here later. So this is called DevOps, Bad Terraform. It's basically a collection of code and thoughts I've had over the years of DevOps consulting. A bit about me. I'm a cloud security consultant at ScaleSec. So I work with Eric. My background is in DevOps and cloud security. Topics today, writing good Terraform, general things about automation, best practices, and then a bit about security. And just a disclaimer, this is opinionated, so you don't have to do what I'm doing. It's just good practice. It's very flexible. You can change whatever you want. MIT license, so feel free. So I'll start with these principles that I thought of. So the first thing you should have is a remote backend, ideally with state locking. So something like S3 and DynamoDB that supports state locking, always enable versioning just in case something gets messed up. You don't want to have it in Git. That's going to cause a bunch of issues. I'll talk about that later. You want to have your credentials separate from your code. So don't do this. So a lot of people will do this. They'll put the access key in here. They'll put a hard-coded role or user or something like that. So don't do that. Use something like an environment variable. Most of the providers support it, like Google credentials, AWS profile, something like that. Separate your config from your code. So you might be familiar with a TFR, something like that. You don't want to have hard-coded parameters in your files. You want to use TFRs, variables, stuff like that. Another thing that lets you do is if you have multiple environments, you can scope the names to the environment. So you could combine, something like var-environment or .environment dash whatever the name of the thing is. So you could have one module, one resource, but for multiple environments. Next thing, I think this is contentious. I haven't seen a lot of people do this. I personally like to separate stuff in different files. I'll get into that in detail later, but basically, like if you have a bunch of S3 buckets, you could put that in s3.tf. If you have CloudFront resources, you put that in CloudFront.tf. I think it makes it a lot easier to read stuff. Terraform is going to flatten it anyway because they generate a graph, but for the user, just to, for something like a PR review or just development, it's a lot easier rather than putting everything in a main TF. And that includes your provider config, backend, all that stuff. You should write stuff that is reusable. So probably everyone's familiar with a module, but the module should be reusable, meaning you could pass different configs, keep the same files. You shouldn't have to modify the Terraform code to set it up somewhere else. So like, in a different region, a different environment, or just different variable names, stuff like that. So that's what I mean by reusable. So again, I'll get into this in detail later, but you want to have self-contained modules so that they have a specific purpose. So you can have like a whole database component that creates not just a DB instance, but all the resources for it, IAM permission, stuff like that. That could be one module, and you should be able to reuse that so you can have it in prod, staging, all that kind of stuff. And then I personally don't like nesting modules. I've seen that a lot. I guess it's okay if it's logically separate, but I generally don't recommend you nest modules. It's going to cause just confusion. You have to pass your variables twice. I wouldn't recommend it. Another thing is you want to decouple your resources. So don't do stuff like call a remote state, which is a kind of resource. And that's going to actually pull the state file and look up a resource. You don't want to do that because then it's going to couple different modules. And if you have like IAM and RDS and they're two separate modules, you change something in IAM, but now your RDS is affected even though the code is the same. So I wouldn't do that. Use something like a data resource. And even then try not to couple things that are dependent on other resources, which I'll get into later. Next thing is automation. You want to automate as much as possible. Terraform is kind of engineered to handle a flat repository, meaning you have the TFRs in the same folder. You run Terraform in it, and it finds the files in that folder. But there's ways to engineer around that so you can have them separate, which I'll get into later. But in general, you want to automate stuff at the very least with Bash. That way you could just speed up your runs, but then you could also put it in a CI pipeline like TF Cloud or Atlantis, something like that. Lastly, you want to have a good git ignore. You don't want to commit your state file if it's local. You don't want to commit plans, the .terraform directory, because that might have secrets and just binaries and other stuff. So you want to ignore everything that's not the code. And then if you have other stuff, ignore that too. Just, basic stuff. So let's talk about IAM. So I've seen a lot where accounts that run Terraform are overprivileged. So it could be your own account having full-on admin access. You could have a CI/CD account that also has admin access because of Terraform doing so much, you kind of have to give it a lot of permissions. But I don't recommend giving it an admin account because usually when you're running Terraform, you're going to have your credentials stored somewhere, like in your Circle CI config or somewhere else. And if that gets stolen, then you have an admin account on the loose. So it's worth to spend some time to scope your credentials so you can evaluate what resources you're setting up and then what permissions you need. Like if you have multiple users and they're only going to be working with EC2, they don't need something like, Kinesis or RDSX or stuff like that. So just think about what different users are doing and scope their policies accordingly. Another cool thing you could do is restrict access to the actual state file. So in an ideal config, you're going to have separate state files, not just for different modules, but also for different environments. You can restrict access. Let's say you're using S3. You could restrict access to the bucket or the object. So if you have a developer, you can restrict access to the prod state file, as you should always do that for devs. And then they won't be able to do anything. Like they can't read it, they can't break it, they can't edit it. And likewise, if their credentials get stolen, which happens all the time, then you don't have to worry about your prod environment. Like I mentioned, if you're using CI/CD, make sure that policy is scoped as well. And another thing you could do is, it's also good practice, by the way, to use roles. And most of this is in AWS context, but it kind of applies to every cloud. But you can assume a role rather than just using a user thing. And you can add conditions to this policy. So since IAM rules are evaluated deny first, so you could add this kind of condition. So this is just an example, but you could deny assuming this role if the IP address doesn't fall in this range. That's just an example. So you should definitely do that. It's just part of layered security. So not only are you scoping the policy, you're also restricting who can assume that. This applies to this policy here, but also in general, when you're using IAM in AWS, I highly recommend using this policy generator. All you have to do is just open IAM in the console, you click policies, create policy, and then it'll bring you to this. And you can make it visually, you could edit the JSON, but it makes it 20 times faster to just put it in here, click on JSON, copy the JSON, then you can put that in your code. And it's validated and it's just much nicer. I don't know if people are aware of that. I assume they are, but just good to know. So now we can get into some examples. So I made 4 examples from worst to best case. They're kind of a little bit contrived, but I've seen this when I was consulting, and like I've seen this at even big companies just writing this crazy stuff, and I don't know how they get anything done, but this is based on stuff I've seen. So first example is worst case scenario. So there's a bunch of issues with this. So it doesn't have a backend. All the resources are in one file. So it's not a module. There's no config. There's no automation. There's no README. This is something I've literally seen in a big company. So if we take a look, so everything in here is in one file. The user access stuff is hard coded. This is, by the way, based off a project Eric and I work on called Find COVID-19 Testing for Coders Against COVID. So basically we just helped out creating a bunch of stuff for this cool project that is now is it the #1 source? I guess it's like the #1 source for finding COVID testing centers.
Yes, and it's the official source that FEMA uses for New York, New Jersey, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico.
Yeah, it's really cool. We worked with some really cool people. So long story short, it's just a map with a ton of data, API, all the infras, and Terraform. So I just took some random stuff out of that repo, just use an example, and then I modified it. So in this case, it's very bad. So you could see, and this is all public, by the way. Everything's hard coded here. There's no variables. Everything is in one file, like I said. So you have Route 53 stuff, you have S3 buckets, some CloudFront stuff, IAM, and it's kind of a mess to navigate. You know, you have like data stuff randomly here. So it's kind of hard to see what it does at first glance. It's hard to find where stuff is, and then it's not configurable at all. So some specific issues. So there's no remote backend, like I said. So if you rely on Git, you're going to have merge conflicts. You're going to have issues where if two people are working on one thing, you're going to have inconsistent runs. So if they both apply at the same time, that's going to be bad. There's no state locking. Everything's in a single state file. So one, it's just going to be slow. Every time Terraform runs, it's going to have to recompute this, and it's going to be slow. You rely on a single state file, so it's a single source of failure. If you have some kind of remote backend that supports locking, then it's going to slow everything down because only one person can apply at one thing. So if you have two completely different resources that people are working on, you can't apply them at the same time. And if you have to roll back, like if you have a version bucket and you have to roll back, then you have to roll back everything and then manually edit, and it's just a mess. Nothing is going to be spaghetti. Like I said, the config is hard to navigate. It's hard to read. And it's not operator friendly, meaning just as an example, I wrote this ETL pipeline a while ago for someone who didn't know Terraform, and it used a ton of different components. It was like 500 lines, ECS, spot fleet, all that stuff. And the person knew ETL really well, but they didn't know Terraform. But I wrote it and I put some bash on it, and then it was configurable. So all she had to do was just edit this config file. So it's just 2 lines, you know, it's like X equals Y, whatever. And then just run a bash script, and that's all they had to do. So that's much easier to digest than this whole file and then giving them commands to run and all that stuff. And then this isn't reusable. So you can't launch this in a new environment without changing the resource, without duplicating stuff. And like, you know, if you have an EC2 instance resource, you're gonna have to make another EC2 instance resource with different configs. So that's no good. Next example, I call it less bad. It's not great, but it's less bad. So we have a backend. We have some stuff separated out. We have a little README. And again, this is all in the repo. You could check it out after. There's some variables, there's some configs, which is nice. But everything, for the most part, is still in one file. So that's not really ideal. So again, you're gonna have a single state file because everything is just in one config. It's not super reusable. It's kind of reusable, but it's not super reusable because you're still gonna have to copy everything. Like this backend config is hard-coded, so you're still gonna have to make a copy of that. And so it's not great, but it's still better than the other one. Next one is almost great. So I'm gonna explain this layout because it's pretty different. I haven't seen this in a while. So I don't know if people are actually doing this. So basically we have this kind of structure. So we have environments under here. So everything under here is going to be environments. You could have staging, you could have prod, QA, whatever. Everything under an environment is going to be this kind of thing I call a component. So this is just a config. So it's going to have your backend. These are your configs for your backend. This is config for your actual code. Same thing here. So if you wanted to have another environment that's prod, all you have to do is copy this thing. You change this to prod. You know, it's going to be a different folder, but it's a very simple structure, and it's reusable. You could have as many environments as you want. And then modules, they're just generic modules. So the backend, you'll get the backend config from Terraform init. The provider, that's a variable. You could see files are now split out. So if I open up cloudfront.tf, you know, it's pretty apparent. It's just CloudFront. Same thing with S3. And then IAM, everything's logically separated. I know where stuff is. And then my data sources, I know that they're going to be in here. So it's super easy to navigate. And there's a bash script that accompanies this, which in a nutshell, it takes in the module name, which is going to be, in this case, front end or Route 53, the environment you want it, so something like staging, and then the action, which is just plan or apply. So you can modify this as you want, but basically it's going to get the config directory here, which in this case is going to be staging. It's going to pass it to Terraform init. So it's going to get the backend config, and then you're telling it to initialize in the module directory, which is what you get here. So this is what I was talking about before, where you could automate Terraform to have a different structure. Rather than having everything in one folder, you separate the modules from the configs, and now these modules are completely reusable. You can make 6,000 different environments with the same module. It doesn't matter. And because the resources in here, they're either variables or they're going to have the environment name in here. So as a side note, I like to put IAM inside the module because it's much easier to manage when it's just more predictable rather than managing IAM separately. Some places centrally manage IAM, so that's a little different, but I like to put things in self-contained modules. So when I make the front end module, I know exactly what it's going to make. When I destroy it, I know what's going to get destroyed. There's not going to be any leftover stuff, especially with IAM. You don't want, users or roles just left over after. So this one is pretty good. If you didn't automate it, this is the kind of stuff you would have to type, and it's very tedious. So you'd have to manually type all this out. You'd have to tell it where the backend config is, and it's per environment. You have to type it out per module. So it's very important to automate it, because obviously no one in the right mind would ever type this out manually, although I have seen it. The only problem with this is that there's no region or multi-cloud support. So if you notice, it's just the staging environment. And the region is just in this config. And you would have to copy some stuff and modify it a lot to get multi-region support. So that's what I did. So this is a good example. I call this You Made It. So this has all the principles we talked about, and also has multi-region, multi-cloud support, some better automation, and it's, you could take this example and dump it in CI/CD pipeline and it'll work fine. So let me explain this. So, and again, this is extensible, so you could change this however you want to, as long as you just modify 2 lines in the bash script, which is really simple. So let's take AWS. This is going to be our cloud. We'll have different regions. So there's global and there's going to be other stuff. So with AWS, you have global stuff like S3 or IAM, and meaning like the console view, it's going to be global. Buckets are still regional, but you still see all your buckets. So and here I just put an example of IAM. There's no actual IAM module, but you could have an IAM module if you wanted to. There's no environment because it's IAM, but you could have S3 stuff. You could have IAM. Maybe you have, I don't know, global cloud trail config, whatever. So in here, it's mostly the same thing. The only difference is this module file. So this is used by Bash to just read it, and this is going to be the name of the actual module, which I'll show in a second. But this is what tells the automation to which module to read. So you could put this anywhere you want. I put it in a separate file because I want to separate the Bash logic from the Terraform logic, but you could put it in here if you wanted to, just, tell Bash where it is. And then, so we have another region here, and then we have a bunch of different environments. You could have, again, as I said, as many as you want. So let's say in admin, we have a Jenkins module. Prod's going to have the same thing as staging. And these things are going to be basically the same. It's the same module. The only difference is backend's going to have a separate state file. This Jenkins file, this is just an example. Again, I'm not going to write a Jenkins module. That's going to take forever. But the module says find Jenkins and then pass it these values. And then the same thing with GCP. Again, these are just dummy values, but you have a region, you have an environment, and then you have a component here, and you're going to tell it what module to, you can put anything here. Modules are also separated by cloud. So I have AWS and then I have GCP here. So I can have the same kind of business logic. So I have my front end and, just GCP stuff is just an example, but you could have the same business logic with obviously different resources, but it's going to be the same thing. So this is all completely generic. So you could pass in configs and reuse it as much as you want. And then the same thing goes for GCP. So you could have as many modules as you want, as many clouds as you want. Basically, you just keep adding directories here. You could have as many environments as you want, as many regions as you want. It's super extensible. And it's all thanks to this bash script here. So it takes a few more parameters. Yeah, you pass it cloud region. So from this schema here, you have cloud region, the environment, so like admin, the component, which is Jenkins, and then the action, which is again, plan or apply. And when I say component, I mean that this thing under the environment is a component. So it's a self-contained configuration based on a module. You can have some validation here. That's an exercise for you. You can put in like, does the directory actually exist? Am I missing parameters, whatever. So if you want to change this is what I said when it's extensible. All you have to do is just change these 3 lines here. So if you want to change, let's say you wanted to have like a cloud folder. So you just add just a cloud folder here, and then it'll change the directory. You don't really have to change any of the code, and that's pretty cool. So same thing with the modules. And then we have a variable for the plan because you want to have deterministic plans. I just wrote these functions here so you could reuse them. So it's the same thing as before. It's just a little more extensible. You could implement anything else you want, import, refresh, doesn't matter. And then it's going to init, and then it's just going to check what the action is. So if you want to plan, it's going to plan. If you want to apply, it's going to apply. And that is how that good example works. So, and if you want details, I put some more details in the README. So like I said, handles arbitrary amount of clouds, environments, regions, modules. It's going to initialize for whatever component you pass every time. So you could run it, in parallel 50 times. And it's pretty cool. I haven't really seen anyone do anything like this. I think example 3 I've seen maybe once, but a lot of what I see is example 2. Part of it, I think, is that people just provide modules in the Terraform registry. So that's just like the way to do it, is put it all in main.tf. But, when I was consulting, number 2 is mostly what I've seen. I've seen some number 1. But anyway, that's free for anyone to grab it. Like I said, MIT license, go nuts. And I think that is it for my presentations. Like I said, it's on GitHub. If there's any issues, feel free to open up an issue or make a PR or whatever. I think that's it.
All right, great.
Nice.
So if anyone has any questions, I've allowed talking for everybody, or if you would prefer, you could type it in the Q&A as well. So feel free to unmute and you can ask Ilan any questions you may have. Otherwise, I think really good presentation. Good job.
Thanks.
Yeah, we got people in the chat asking for the GitHub link.
Yeah, I'll paste it in a second after this.
I think that actually answers both questions in the Q&A so far.
Yes. So to answer the code and recording, yes, we are recording this webinar and it will be shared afterwards. Okay, great. Any other questions or anything? No?
Hey guys, this is Hamza. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, quick question about looping. I know Terraform doesn't necessarily have the best features for looping over a list of values to generate replicas of the exact type of S3 bucket, for example. Do you know if there's any other best practices for cases like that? What I currently do is manage a AWS environment for a lot of clients, upwards of 60 to 70 clients at a time, and having to manage a consistent environment, the exact same type of S3 bucket, CloudFront distributions, etc. Thought it might be easier if there was something like that where I could just pass in the list of client names and then have it kind of iterate over that and kind of create templatized strings for the S3 bucket name, region, etc.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for that? Yeah.
Off the top of my head, you can definitely do that. So I've done something similar where in your config file, you can have, let's say, a list of names or something you could make a map to. And then you could use either a dynamic block. TF12 has stuff like for each. That's pretty useful in this case. So you can add to your Terraform logic something like for each with a dynamic block that should be able to do it. And then probably a bit of bash magic. But I think if you make a map of those values and then use for each, I think that should do it.
Yeah, that'll work. Can you guys hear me?
Look into that.
Yes, we can hear you, Dan.
Yes.
Hi. So I noticed that you used functions as you were building out those switches and parameters that you were passing in. So there's Terraform has environmental variables, the TF-CLI args, and then they have the -int, -plan, -apply. And so you can put those strings in those variables, and then you only need to run Terraform apply, and it will actually use what's in those environmental variables. So you don't actually have to create a function for it. There's a built-in mechanism in Terraform for that. Just FYI.
Thanks. That's good to know. I'll look into that.
Great. We do have another question from our Q&A. Do we need to use Terraform Enterprise for production, or do generally most clients go with open source?
No. I mean, Terraform Enterprise is cool. There's also TF Cloud, which has a free option, so you could use that. A lot of people go that way, but you're not going to have any issues using the open source product. And like I said, TF Cloud is also free, so you should try both. There's also Atlantis if you want to integrate with the CI/CD pipeline.
Okay, and I do know we have a talk on Terraform Enterprise coming up later in our hug. So we'll be able to compare and contrast, the open source versus the Terraform Enterprise offering as well. All right, great. We've had some good questions. Anybody else have anything on their mind? Here's another question. How Ansible complements with Terraform, or can we all use Terraform itself?
Yeah, for the same client that had the worst case scenario, actually, I helped integrate Ansible into their Terraform pipeline. So one thing you could do is something like local exec or remote exec to just run the Ansible command line. Or you could run some external bash scripts too. Like you could wrap Terraform and Ansible in bash. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay, I hope that answered the question. All right. Anybody else? Anything else? All right. Yeah, it looks like people really appreciate your time. Great talk. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, good job, man.
Nice.
Very cool. Great. All right. So now I think we're going to go ahead and jump into our next talk. So we have, I believe Josh is going to be giving the talk, right? So on Terraform Enterprise. And yeah, I'll just let you take it away from here.
Cool. Thank you very much. So I think it's interesting to, don't worry, I'm not going to slide you to death. But I think it's interesting to consider what we just saw and the capabilities of open source. Obviously, you can do quite a bit with it, right? Like the promise of Terraform is that it's not really like a normalized workflow across clouds. You know, the SDKs are still the SDKs, the service offerings are still the service offerings, and there's nuances in between. But I think the workflow and the pattern you can follow certainly allows and eases the process over time. And so when we talk about Terraform Enterprise, what we're really talking about is, like, if I can use the open source for everything, why would I even use Enterprise, right? And I'm going to cover some of that today, but I'm mostly going to talk about a question I get all the time, which is, okay, cool, Terraform Enterprise, that's neat. It looks like a GUI, and that's all well and good, but how can I actually use Terraform Enterprise in like an automated way, right? And so really what they're asking for is, can you give me some type of golden pipeline or strategy around pipelining and use Terraform at the same time, right? And that's really what today's talk is going to be about, or at least what I'm going to try and talk about. And so I won't spend too much time on like where enterprise starts to differ. I mean, we understand the idea of multi-cloud compliance and management. That's really the sweet spot of Terraform. Self-service infrastructure. When you go to the enterprise, it's the same thing. It's just you have enterprise problems, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you the enterprise is, you know, infinitely better than open source if you're just a one-person shop or you're a small team of little boutique ninjas, right? Like, I'm not going to make that argument. But if you're a big, massive, old company that should have died like 20 years ago, and you have like tons and tons of bureaucratic process, tons and tons of team, and oh, by the way, a terrible talent problem, then yeah, you're probably going to want to use something that's going to corral a lot of those, you know, issues that you have at every little step of the release process, right? That's really what Terraform is geared to solve. And really all of our enterprise products are geared to solve those types of challenges. So just keep that in mind when you ask questions, and throughout this is like, I'm not getting into a war about which one's better. I'm just telling you enterprise is going to be better for most larger organizations that have to deal with legacy processes as well as legacy developers. So the real value add here is like multi-cloud compliance and management, right? So when these big organizations or any organization that's adopting Terraform Enterprise, what they're looking for is they're looking to reduce risk, right? Security, Sentinel is a part of the tool. Sentinel is a part of all the tools, but the reality is it's more of a security offering. So when we think about Terraform Enterprise, we're really thinking of a DevSecOps tool. I feel like Terraform Open Source by itself is more of a DevOps tool, whereas, you know, Enterprise really starts to kind of play with that sec space. Now, it's not true security like Vault is true security, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about pipeline security or workflow security or provisioning security, right? We're still staying in the tier that we're discussing, but we are talking about security in that tier. Reducing costs, we've had actually tons of positive feedback on our cost estimation that we recently rolled out and are starting to iterate more and more on. So we're not really getting in the CMP space, but we're trying to start to play around with like, all right, what are the broader implications of management when we talk about costs, especially when we're managing resources in lots of different environments. And then finally, you know, again, going back to think about the target audience here, right? Like, we're increasing productivity for teams that have a lot of process and a lot of red tape and a lot of, you know, like essentially revolving door type of movement of talent. And the idea is the productivity increases because you have a workflow that everybody can assign themselves to, you can apply RBAC controls to, you can secure, you can kind of allow self-service and feel comfortable about it when you go home on the weekend that you're not going to blow something up, right? And that's really where Terraform Enterprise's sweet spot is. Much like the normal, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, there's modules, there's the public module registry. Well, there's the private module registry, but there's also like enterprise-based integrations. ServiceNow probably being the most famous one of the enterprise-grade integrations. Of course, anything can really be integrated with it because at the enterprise level, you get an API, right? And that's where you start to see flexibility of automation workloads, some of the things we're going to talk about today. But the idea here is that, you know, those same types of, the ecosystem exists, but yes, there's an extended ecosystem at the enterprise level that, again, is more about managing, you know, enterprise-grade problems. Why ServiceNow? Well, because ticket systems are still a thing for large legacy organizations. That's the way it is, right? And even if you have, and those organizations that are that big at that scale, they're probably going to have one-off workloads anyway. Like, I need to provision like a massive machine, and I normally don't. I might have a Sentinel policy that says no, we always stay within, you know, like 32 core, but maybe I need to get like this crazy, you know, boutique mega machine, and I need to do like a ServiceNow ticket for that, right? That would be an example of a workflow for that. So those types of workflows exist. Terraform Enterprise supports them all. So let's get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. I think there was a great survey of good Terraform code and good Terraform practice. I was actually relieved that I didn't see anything too egregious that I've done. So hopefully nobody will be angry when they see my code compared to what we saw. But still, the idea is that what I really want to illustrate today is how to use Terraform in an automated fashion, while also being able to flexibly support your local machine type of provisioning. The example, I think, if we're going to think about a contextual use case, is you're an organization, and I talked to somebody about this last week, you're an organization where you want to automate your pipelines for maybe your main environments. We'll say development and then release. You have two primary environments that you want to automate. You don't want humans to touch it ever. But then you still probably have like one-off workflows where I might need to just like sandbox this function that I just wrote, because maybe I touch everything. Maybe I'm, front end, back end, data engineering, data pipelines, and I also do the cloud infrastructure as well. I don't want anybody to slow me down. So I'm gonna like just sandbox this thing, deploy it, test it. Once it's good to go, then I'll drop it in the main pipeline for a release, right? So Terraform Enterprise allows you to do just that. You can still have your normal localized workflows as well as CI/CD workflows, as well as direct integrated VCS workflows and ClickOps workflows. I don't want to do ClickOps. Me either. I hate ClickOps, right? I feel like the entire existence of HashiCorp is really to prevent ClickOps. So the idea is that, if we think about automation, automation doesn't happen by clicking stuff into existence. Automation happens by writing code, right? Infrastructure as code is the beginning of that paradigm. And then you think about policy as code with Vault. And then you think about essentially networking or identity and services code. Less code if you think about ACLs, I guess, kind of. But the tool set revolves around automation at some layer or level of the development lifecycle. One thing I just mentioned is that Terraform isn't just a ClickOps tool at the enterprise level. Like, sure, there's a GUI, and I think when people see GUIs, they're like, oh my God, ClickOps. And it's like, yeah, I guess that's kind of true. If you use it that way, you can. But the idea is that Terraform Enterprise also supports, API-based automation workflows, as well as sandbox localized workflows, like the same way you'd use open source. You can use Enterprise in the exact same way. So I'll kind of dig into how we do that a little bit later. But what you really want, and again, going back to that question I get asked in the field all the time, is like, can you help me build a golden pipeline? Right? I know I need to support my ClickOps people. I know I need to support GUIs. I know I need to support all the things. I have ninjas I have to support too. But at the end of the day, what I really want is a tried and true pipeline that I can keep people's hands off of and automate the policy for, so that I know, and cost for that matter, so that I have like some predictability in my release from, cycle to cycle. Whether I'm moving to one-day releases, hourly releases, weekly releases, monthly releases. The idea is that that type of predictability doesn't happen, by wrangling the cats and hoping that everybody's as good of a ninja as our first presenter, that they can actually put things together in a reasonable way, right? Like, you do that with a tool that kind of forces it to happen. And so this is what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna kind of walk you through the code for all of this. I can make some of this publicly available, but a lot of this is a private project that I use at HashiCorp, so I'm not 100% sure. I probably have to, change a few things before I can share it out. But some of this I can definitely share. I will. But just to kind of give you an abstract understanding of what we're talking about here, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage, to me, tools that are really good for the jobs that they do. On the left-hand side, you're going to see, well, first in the middle, we have a user or users. And these users are going to interop with their VCS system as well as Terraform Enterprise. The VCS system is actually, yes, the VCS is there. And the one I'm going to use today is GitHub and GitHub Actions. But I also have one of these for Azure DevOps and Azure Pipelines. And so the idea is that what we're going to do is we're going to integrate with our VCS. We're going to run code like we normally would. We're going to write code like we normally would. We're going to run through a normal Git workflow like we normally would. And the idea is that we're going to build our images because we want to kind of maintain an ephemeral footprint. Ephemeral footprint being that I do not want to have to worry about configuration management because I'm just going to rebuild it new every time. Right? Like, if I need a new thing, I'm just going to basically have these dedicated images that never change across deployments. And instead of having to deal with it works on my machine problems, I'm just going to nix it and redeploy it. And I'm going to do it on regular intervals, right? So walk through the code for that. And then on the left-hand side of the version control systems, they all kind of share the similarities. I mean, there's differences, certainly. Like, and we'll talk about the differences between them. Some people may be familiar with GitLab. I guess I could have put that on here too. I have a few things in that, but it doesn't matter. But the reality is from the VCS level, where the VCSs are kind of moving is they're moving into this space of like single source of truth, right? Your code's already here. I guess we might as well keep like any configuration parameters that you might want to pass to that code, especially when we talk about provisioning infrastructure. And so what we're going to see is that whether it's GitHub Actions or GitHub or Azure DevOps, you can store secure files, encrypted files. You can store variables that you might want to pass to your runtimes, and as well as the code itself, right? Which essentially allows you to 100% automate pipelines without humans ever touching it, right? So you do it one time, you integrate it with Terraform and the Terraform RC API token, and you don't have to ever see anybody touching it. And it's really valuable when it comes to actually realizing automation, right? We talk about automation a lot, but I see very few people actually do it. And so I think the reason why though is because they're expecting Terraform to do all of it, but really I think at the end of the day, there are right tools for the right job. We will talk a little bit towards the end about how maybe the future of Terraform, it might be moving more towards that all-in-one CI/CD thing, but not right now, it's not, right? So you're gonna need to leverage and finagle other things. On the right-hand side is Terraform Enterprise, which to the point earlier about like good practice, we're gonna centralize state by default because that's what Enterprise does, as well as handling workspace locking for you. Workspace segmentation is also managed for you. I have a private module registry, although I will not use it for the example I'm gonna do today. I'm not at the point where I need it yet. We might talk about optimization strategies at the end, but I don't really need it right now. And then there's cost estimation and Sentinel, and those are the kind of the points of Terraform that I think really harden this pipeline to be effective, because now I can run policy on the code that I write and have the CLI workflow or the automated pipeline workflow pick it up. So the idea is that like things will fail because I have assigned policies. We'll get into code organization as well, because one thing I think you'll find is if you isolate your policies from your normal code, you can actually run parallel, like different types of workflows. If you had the same VCS connected to Terraform as your policy, you have like some webhook conflicts when Terraform Enterprise tries to set those up. But if you actually isolate the code and maybe use a submodule instead, you don't have those same conflicts. I'm not going to deploy Azure unless we get to the point where we talk about the Azure DevOps pipeline and how it's a little bit different. But what we're going to do is everything's going to be deployed on Google Cloud, and I'll kind of walk you through why and the scenario for it as well. Before we do that, though, are there any kind of initial questions to kind of level set on like why we're here, the enterprise offering, before I jump into this? Because now we're going to start getting really code heavy and that kind of thing.
Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to unmute. Everyone should have talking permitted now, or just drop them in the Q&A, and would be happy to answer them.
Okay, cool.
I have a quick question. Are there any plans to open source Sentinel?
Great question. We are talking about it. I am not on the team that ultimately makes those decisions. I have mentioned that they do that. I think it would go a long way to building a community around it, to be quite honest. I don't really know though. I know we just recently released, and you'll see it when I show the enterprise GUI, you'll see we have these new policies that you can use that we're writing because we're learning about our customers, right? We got a lot of banking customers, a lot of customers actually in different types of industries, and we're starting to learn the policies that they need. Like some have different compliance parameters than others. So we're starting to release that at the enterprise level. But as far as like if we're going to do open source or not, I'm just not 100% sure. Kevin, do you know? Have you heard anything about it?
I'm like you. I've heard talk about it, and mostly because of the adoption of the language is where it's a consideration. And but there is the Sentinel CLI that you can download for free. I've had some folks that are that use that to validate certain things. It's not near as powerful as what's built into the enterprise. But it can at least validate policies. It's mostly meant for testing and things like that. But if you want to kind of get familiar with the language, see how it works, the Sentinel CLI is certainly a great place to start.
Okay, great question. Anyone else have any questions? All right, here's one. Does CI/CD pipelines built with enterprise versus free version differ?
They don't differ in how you write them. And that's one thing I was going to talk about. So I'm glad you asked. It's actually a pretty good setup. They really don't. I don't want to dig into it yet though, because the story is important to understand why, because I wrote a lot of stuff, right? So it's really important to like actually do it in the right order. But no, they don't different. The pipeline you write in Terraform Enterprise is the same pipeline you write in open source. The difference is what you have to do with open source. If you do the same type of pipeline that I'm going to do with open source, you're going to have to consider other things. There's going to be other considerations. You'll ultimately end up writing more code. It's fine. I mean, it's not that you can't do it. It's just you're going to have to take into account other things. Whereas with enterprise, I don't have to worry about those things. So I can focus on the pipeline and I can focus on my applications. Because at the end of the day, I wrote 7 applications across like a bunch of functions and buckets, right? Like, so the idea is that I would prefer to work on that and get my product to market. So I prefer, I just don't want to care about stuff like that. But they shouldn't really differ in how you write them that much.
Wonderful. All right. If there's no more questions, I'm very interested in seeing what the CI/CD pipeline looks like.
Actually, I do have one question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. This is Dan again. So I've written out all that code for pretty much kind of full enterprise level integration of the open source version of Terraform. And honestly, I wonder if, some of those customers would have maybe saved money even if they would have used an enterprise version, but I don't know really anything about enterprise. So is it possible that I could go through one of my projects with somebody at Terraform and they could help me evaluate where would be a tipping point towards helping to guide people into the enterprise level?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you remember my comment to begin with, I'm not going to get in a holy war about which one you should use. You're going to use whichever one you want to use. That's fine, right? The thing is that at some point there is a break-even point. It's dude, I'm going to spend so much money maintaining this scaffolding plumbing nightmare. And oh, by the way, my ninjas leave every 2 or 3 years. So I can't keep any of them. And so the idea is what do I do in those situations? What you do is you bleed money. Right. So the idea is that, yeah, there is a certain point in the journey where enterprise just becomes at the floor. It's well, I'm saving money because I'm not having to spend on the maintenance. A lot of times we think about hourly costs, right? You might have teams that you dedicate and you treat it like a full-time employee, right? That's a typical cost. There's a lot of other costs that you don't even think about. What is the cost of an outage? Right? What is the cost of my public facing application that does 70% of my business going down for a week because somebody fat fingered a merge conflict, right? That's an unforeseen cost that has nothing to do with your full-time employee payments that you have to account for, that oftentimes sneaks up on you. And it's oh, you could have just bought Terraform Enterprise, right? And prevented that altogether.
Yeah. So that's, I guess that's, so I work for a consulting company, I'm being sent out to different clients for anywhere from a month to a year or more, and helping them put together their infrastructure as code and configuration as code and that type of thing. And so, like I said, I've been doing this for a little while, so I've got a pretty good idea of what it takes to build out an infrastructure to make it enterprise level. But like you said, I coded a lot of stuff to figure all that out, and there's no ego involved for me. I also know that if you're maintaining all that code to do those pieces, that's a huge part of the expense. So, I'd really like to just know it from my own experience and being able to offer that, best advice possible for our customers. If you're this committed to this and your environment's this size, and you guys are really hoping to make this a fully self-service environment at some point, then this is going to be the logical first step for you, where, jumping right on board with it or whatever. But, and so I'd like to learn where that demarc point is, and get a better idea of what enterprise offers, so that I know, what I would have not had to code out.
Definitely. We'll probably have time. I don't think this is going to take me an hour. And even if we don't, we can sync up afterwards and we can,
Yeah, I think it would definitely require, maybe an opportunity to meet later or whatever, so.
Yeah, and after Josh's presentation, we will be talking everything HashiCorp. We do have a developer advocate on today who, Jacquie, she would be happy to talk HashiCorp, I'm pretty sure. We got a question in the chat about Vault, so we'll probably save those questions until then. And it looks like we have one more question. Does it help to understand what was the previous state? Say someone modified SSH permissions on VM, now would like to know what previous permissions were given before someone changed this.
It could be, right? Like if you can use the TF remote state to actually, now Terraform doesn't offer any like remote state parsing built into it. If I don't know if that's like a leading question to get us down more of the CMP path. Maybe one day we will. But I mean, you'd have to parse it yourself. But if you have a use case for, I would like to know what my previous state was, or a previous state from like another workspace before I go do a thing, like before I go run a job, the pipeline's actually a good place to do that, right? Because then you could use Terraform's API to go pull that data and then make a decision on whether or not to run the respective job. But you'll have to do all the parsing yourself.
Right. I hope that answered the question.
Okay.
Looks like we're good.
All right, so let's get into it, right? I told you Packer's a part of this for ephemeral jobs. You'll see here, this is the code I'm working with. This is OAC bot, which is really recently being called something different. Now we call it OpMap. But the idea is that this code exists as infrastructure, as images that I write, as scripts that I run to support it, and as services. These services are all submodules. So these are all independent like repos that I manage as well. I keep them all in the same place, which is why I use submodules. And so the idea is that you can effectively think of this OAC by anything that's got the infrastructure, at least the way I organize things, as like my pipeline. So if I were a team of pipeline engineers, this would be the code base I would be responsible for. Like I might have somebody else that does Salesforce search, or somebody else that does OpMap policy, probably a security team. I might have somebody else that does, the OAC engine or the OAC bot list, OAC bot get. Those sound like functions, they are. So the idea is that you might have other teams doing that, but me as like the owner of the pipeline, this is what I manage, right? This primary repo is what I manage. And so what's in here? Well, I told you Packer's in here. And so what we can see is I have a script that basically goes in here and basically just builds a Packer image, right? It's a Packer image I expect to use. It actually builds my zip archives for my Golang API that I wrote for a very small VM for part of the job, and pulls in another piece of code that it uses. It just basically archives everything up, creates some variables dynamically, and then runs Packer build, right? This would be the first step of the pipeline. Ideally, this is its own pipeline job in GitHub Actions. But right now, like I just run this every so often. If I update the image, then I update the image. But I have this as like a separate step in a script that I run, right? On the infrastructure side, before we actually look at the pipeline, you'll see, again, trying to follow best practices as much as possible. I'm using git ignore for things that I run locally. The reason I'm doing this, we will talk about it later, but just so you know, is this so I can run things locally. I can run sandboxes locally without interfering with my pipeline. That's why all this is here. It's git ignored, but that's why it's there. The idea is I don't want to like slow myself down and force everything through a pipeline. So if I want to run it locally, I can. And because I'm using remote state with locking, I never have any conflict. And so what else is in here? Well, we've got functions. So in our functions, you can see that I'm using like the environment variables to actually specify the name. This is actually going to be the workspace that I deploy it to. We'll get into more of that once we get into the pipeline code, but you can see this uses like Slack credentials. It's using a bunch of different components. These are assigning IAM members, just basically using code and variables, just like you would, and trying to like isolate the components as much as possible. The only thing that I use that's in a VM is this graph viz server thing. And so I keep it, segmented from my functions. I try to do serverless everything as much as possible, just because I don't want to have to manage anything. In my main, some people follow different patterns. In my main is where I keep pretty much anything that I'm going to use, any like top level modules I'll define, anything network related, anything that everything else needs to use, I guess like a global type of understanding, I try to keep in my main. You can see here that I'm actually using a creds file. Most people would be like, well, why wouldn't you use an environment variable? I could, but you'll see how I use this with the pipeline in a second, and the fact that I localize it here and still depend, and like I'm building this dynamically in an ephemeral container in a pipeline. So it's not like, it's something that we can make better, and we will talk about how we make that better in the future. or like towards the end of the talk. I'm trying to think anything else I want to talk about. The firewalls in here, just like I said, just base level things that I want to apply to everything else. My VPC access connector so that my functions can talk to my VM, right? Those types of things. And then you've got your outputs, services that I run. So these would be the services that I want to enable in GCP. My buckets that I use to store all of my function archives, as well as what I use to keep my functions, as well as the opportunity as code. You can see here, I have a check to say, look, if this is a release line, don't delete it. But if it's dev, I don't care if you do. Right? That's kind of the idea. You know, just you can do things like this when you're using variables effectively inside the code itself so that you can kind of have behaviors that you expect. You may be thinking like, why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you just do a switch when you pass the command line? I'm not doing a switch. I'm committing code, and the pipeline needs to be smart enough to figure this stuff out on its own. So the idea is that the pipeline is going to dynamically create a workspace if it doesn't exist, and it's only going to deploy to two workspace lines, release and dev. I'll show you how that does that. But in that case, I don't want to destroy any release-based buckets, but dev ones I don't really care, right? Dev ones are not going to be public facing, but the release one's going to be a promoted line that I want people to like hit and touch. I don't want it to be unnecessarily destroyed. And then you can see variables. Most of my variables, I very rarely pass variables in this way, but sometimes it's nice to have like some sane defaults. If you wanted to have, you know, like there's a zone I always deploy into because I'm here, but again, it doesn't hurt you to define a default because you can always override this, right? So having a list of variables that's like a sane series of like, these are the things I will use isn't like the worst thing in the world, especially when you can override. Images. Oh, I guess I could show you this. For those that really like Packer, this is a kind of a Packer file. It uses variables. The variables are created dynamically. I showed you that earlier in the script. But the idea is that when Packer runs, it's going to use all this information to kind of dynamically build the machine that I want to deploy in GCP later. That's, if we have more questions about it, we can talk about that later. The pipeline code. In GitHub Actions, this is stored in a directory under .github, workflows, deploy YAML. You can see here, I have the name of it's just called deploy functions. It runs on two triggers. One is if I push to release, or if I do a pull request to master. It's the only time it runs. And so the idea is, why would you do that? Well, for master, I want to make sure that my pipeline runs and my environment's deployed before I actually pull anything into master and say that it's golden. For release, I don't care because I would have already done this for master anyway. This is like a promotion strategy. I will push master into release, and that is my strategy on a regular basis. I will actually put controls and guardrails on GitHub so that you can't do anything but push into release from master. And it has, you know, and like you'll probably ask for versions, tags like that. But that's why I do it this way, just so that I can make sure that my environments are clean and predictable in my deployment patterns. You can see here I'm defining jobs. Like most CI/CD tools, you're going to have some type of job specification. And they all actually follow the same suit. They all do YAML as well. So the idea here is that we're going to run the Terraform job. It's got a bunch of different steps inside of it. It's going to run on the latest Ubuntu image, which this is going to be an ephemeral image. So it's just going to pull it up, run the job, kill it. Every single time, it's just going to pull a brand new one up. So the idea, we're going to check out the code. You can see here I'm using the GitHub API token. This is a secret. This is a concept that GitHub recently introduced. It's actually really nice. The other guys already had it. Like GitLab already had this. Azure DevOps already had this. But when GitHub introduced it, you know, now it's like, well, we own 75% of all code, and now we have secrets, so you should probably use it. And so the idea is that I can store things in secrets encrypted and then actually pull them into my files, and it'll actually obfuscate them, which is a cool value add. You can see here I'm running commands just to kind of initiate some components. In this case, I'm actually pulling submodules because, again, I told you in my actual code I use a lot of submodules. So I need those to be available so that I can run code inside of them. I'm going to build the OAC bot archive, which this is just going to build. This is a script that builds my archives. If we want to reference that, what this does, it takes all the node code that I have. I think OAC bot get, OAC bot list, and OAC engine are all node. And so the idea is that I have npm modules, package JSON. I have to roll those up into zip archives before I can actually deploy them to Google's Cloud Function platform. And so the idea is that that's what that step does. It just, you know, wraps all that up and takes all the zip archives and makes them available in the infrastructure so that I can deploy them. This is a fun one. This is where we're going to actually create a dynamic workspace. The idea is I'm going to build a TFE config. I'm actually building that infrastructure backend file dynamically, right? If we talk about best practice, like how about it not even existing until runtime? And so the idea is that what I'm doing here is I'm leveraging environment variables, which are actually being triggered off of the reference of the GitHub tag. So the idea is if the reference is release, then it's going to build a release workspace. And if the reference is anything else, it's going to build a dev workspace. This allows me to automate the basically pull request process of master into the same exact environment every single time. Or not. I mean, I don't have to do that, but in this case, that's what I'm doing. What else? Now we're building credentials. Remember I told you I use the credentials file? This is me building that. The idea is the creds actually come from secrets. So I actually keep my Google credentials in the secrets. I could have run this as an environment variable too. The reason I passed this in as a variable is because I actually use it with the functions. I actually scope those functions to that particular user. Yes, I could OAuth. No, I have not had time to do it yet. So that is an area where we could make that better, and then I would make this an environment variable. But for now, it makes it easy to kind of run it, and I'm not too concerned about it because these VMs die right after they're done with the job. Auto TFRs. Yes, there's a TFRs file. There's also an auto TFRs file, and they actually have cascading responsibility. So this is where I talk about you can overwrite some of those same defaults if you want, or you can actually pass in a bunch of secrets that you're keeping in GitHub into a dynamic TFRs file that is then used. And remember, these are obfuscated at runtime. This is where I'm actually saying the image that I'm going to use. Right now I'm on version 2. And then again, we're passing the environment variable, the same thing. It's like if it's release, you know, otherwise it's dev. Then we're going to initialize Terraform. This is the actual GitHub Actions Terraform provider, or the kind of the action library module that anybody could use. You can see that it requires, if you want, you can pass in a Terraform RC for each one of the steps, or you can just pass it in dynamically. Again, I'm keeping this in secrets, and I'm just passing in the backend config that I wrote previously and passing in my token dynamically from the secrets that are kept in GitHub. This is going to initialize, then it's going to validate, do all the things that you would expect, and then it's going to run a Terraform apply. And my Terraform apply is actually done as a skip ahead. And that's really it. That's all that the pipeline does, right? So somebody was asking, like, does this change? You could actually run this pipeline. You could do the exact same thing that I've done here for open source. Keep everything in GitHub secrets if you wanted to. The only thing you don't get is like what you're going to have to add is kind of like the stuff that you saw earlier, which is like setting up an S3 bucket for your remote storage if you want to generate that dynamically, or if you want to switch workspaces. You can definitely do this, but you're going to have to account for other components and just determine if that's what you want to do or not. But the code should similarly be the same. We're kind of early in this process, so it hasn't tiered or ballooned beyond like what open source could handle. Okay. So let's look at it then. What we're building is this. This is the old version. This is actually what's in release right now. This is the new one, right? So I have two different versions. I've been working on dev today, and then this is the the old version that I have. I have two totally existing, two parallel lines that exist. Here they are. This is dev. This is release. This is the one we're going to deploy to. This is the one that's housing just that massive block, ugly, disgusting square image. And so the idea is, if we take a look at some of the things that I've set up here, one of the things, obviously it's a UI, hooray for UIs. But the main thing I want to point out here is I've actually set up some function behaviors policy sets for the dev workspace in particular. So you can see here I have this OAC.dev policy that I've applied to that workspace. It is actually pulling from a separate VCS workflow. So when people say, oh, you can't do VCS workflow with CLI, they have no idea what they're talking about. You can. I am doing that right now. I am literally doing a VCS-based connection. So the idea of a VCS connection isn't necessarily like a VCS workflow. So a VCS connection just allows me to leverage VCS repositories that I have. In this case, I have a totally separate opmap policy repo. I ingest all of my policy through it, all of it, for every single cloud provider. I just keep everything in there. So you imagine at the enterprise level, if you have a security team, They probably own that repo. They may not write all the code. You might have like DevOps people helping them, but eventually they probably become pretty good at it, and then they might just own policies code, right? And that allows them to do that and scale with your team. And the reason why is because, remember, I am using submodules. OAC policy as a submodule. Here's the Sentinel for it. What does this do? It doesn't do anything other than set a correct size default defaults, gets all the resources, gets everything that's a cloud function, and for every single one of those, it makes sure that it has a memory size that is less than 256 megabytes. Why? Because I don't want to be running gig size functions in anything that's not released. It's just a logical thing that I wanted to do. Sure, are they going to run slow in dev environments? I don't care. Like, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm just testing functionality. If it's something public facing, I would change this policy, but for now, this is perfectly fine. Another thing that I have in my policy is the HCL. The idea is that I can set hard mandatory. This could be soft mandatory. Like you have three pretty much degrees of policy behavior or enforcement that you can kind of set. And that's what I'm doing here. Let's see. If I want to pick it up, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to cover before I deploy this thing off. Probably not. Yeah, let's just run it. Let's make it break. I go to OAC bot, here and here, go to my functions. Let's change this to 512. This is one I don't even use, actually. Cool. Policy, cool. So that's going to sit here, and then we can go to go to actions. It'll pick it up in a second. You can see some that have failed past. There it goes. So it picks it up, starts running it. And of course, all of them have like some interface like this, right? Where they like line up your jobs and they show you the little check marks and stuff, and everybody gets all happy and excited. What's happening on the other end of the spectrum from the code is if I actually go to the pull request, you can see that it's running too, right? So it's actually running like my checks. Those that are familiar with Atlantis, you know all about this. And so the idea is that this is, you know, something that that I can actually just kind of monitor. The webhooks are kind of set up for me when I'm using Terraform Enterprise. Let's see, what else I want to show you. It's planning. You can see even here it's running. I don't have to even click here, but it is running. So the idea is it's going to run a plan. It's going to do a cost estimation, which I didn't. I mean, it's on, but I haven't set anything up. Right. So the cost estimation should run. And then on top of cost estimation running, then you'll have the policy check, and hopefully it'll fail. It's doing what it's supposed to do, because we're not supposed to be above 256. Hooray, it failed. So this is an example of having an automated pipeline dedicated to doing what I want it to do. And oh, by the way, it is pushing to the dev instance. I didn't have to set these up ahead of time. It'll create it if it doesn't exist, and it only creates 2, right? So the idea is that I don't have to worry about switching this. I don't have to manually go in and create this. I'm having my pipeline do all of it for me. If I wanted to go manually create a thing, I could. But the idea is that I can run local workflows as well as like these automated workflows, and then have the components of Terraform Enterprise still operate with that CLI-driven workflow or kind of functionality, where it's still running, it's still catching all the errors, it's still, you know, doing what I expect. The pipeline also failed. If we go to the action, which is good. It's what we wanted. We wanted Sentinel to fail, right? We look in here, it'll run, and it'll tell you that it failed. It tells you why. I look at that right there and go, oh, I need to change that, right? Then I can go back in here, change it back to 128. Do it all over again. While this is running, any questions?
I think we had a few questions come in through the Q&A. So the first one is, all these scripts work only on a particular cloud only, say move from AWS to Azure. Would we need to rewrite those scripts?
Which scripts are you talking about? The ones for the actual Terraform code or the scripts that I wrote?
We'll wait for his reply.
If I'm writing Bash, I'm writing Bash, right? Bash will work anywhere. If I need to, zipping up an archive is going to work regardless of whether I run it, right? Like, I don't think that's what you're asking, but we'll just clear that up anyway.
Oh, they were asking about the Terraform scripts.
Yes. So the Terraform has to be changed in the sense that, again, I mentioned this earlier, Terraform is not like 100% normalized. You can't just say, go give me VM and pass it like a Google string and it just worked, or AWS string and it just worked. It's not how it works, because if we did that, we'd have to make a lot of assumptions about what you expect. And so having a more declarative approach to it means that, yes, you're going to have to make some changes. Google Cloud resources are going to be different. In AWS, it's Lambda, right? And they might have different parameters. But this is a great opportunity to use modules, right? One of the things we're going to talk about in a second is how to make all this better. And there's lots of ways to make this better. You can always be better. And so the idea is that one way to do this is, make it more modular, whereas, okay, this is my Google, call this my Google OpMap deployment, right? That should be a module, right? It could be a module that I ingest. And to be honest, I could use Terraform Enterprise. If I don't know if I set up modules in here. I got a few. You could actually use the private module registry to make them a little bit more available. I actually have one, this data center. It's a Google data center. This is kind of what I'm talking about. You have like a module that represents everything that you expect, right? You probably have one of these for AWS. You probably have one of these for Azure, right? You want to modularize as much as possible, because then it takes away that burden of, well, I have to change my Terraform config. It's like, no, ideally you end up just writing main TF files and they just eat modules that build all of this stuff for you. Now it takes you a while to get there, but that's ideally what you're trying to do. So yes, you would probably want to modularize to be able to support, more cloud offerings.
Cool. I hope that answers the question. The next one that we have in the Q&A is, how would these scripts differ compared by going with other cloud native tools like AWS CloudFormation, Google Deployment Manager?
So the SDK scripts, actually let me give you an example of that. So in OpMap, here's an example of, where did I put it? I think I put it here. Here it is. This would be an example of using, the SDK directly, right? It's not, you can definitely do it. You could do everything that I did with the SDKs, right? The question then becomes, just because you can, does it mean that you should? And is everybody as good as you? And for some people, the answer is yeah, we're all great. We're all like a boutique group of ninjas. There's 5 of us and we crush it. Great, continue to crush it. You know who's not that? Big companies with lots of people. And so the idea is that you can't expect everybody to know how to use the SDKs effectively. You can't expect everybody to know how to use all of the SDKs effectively. Usually if you know one really well, like you're kind of married to a cloud provider and you understand their offering really well. You might have dabbled in the others. You might know Bash, but you don't know necessarily the nuances of navigation across SDKs. Some people do. Great, more power to them. Most people don't. And so the idea is that Terraform, while it doesn't necessarily normalize across all of those, it does give you a workflow so that you can use the same type of structure and syntax to do everything. So I think if there is a value add there, I think Terraform makes it easier for larger companies to leverage SDKs that they would have to spend more time to learn and master. But if you're a smaller shop, then yeah, you could definitely do all this with SDKs.
Great. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions that anyone may have? Looks like we have another question about Vault. I'll just throw it out there. With respect to Vault, can we store Vault keys outside of the cloud?
Yeah. Yes. What like with the underlying encryption key?
Yes.
So the underlying encryption key is never exposed. right? I think last time we were on this call, we talked about Vault, and you can use unseal, like you can use auto unseal from the cloud vendor to kind of manage the master key sharding for you. And that will help you with resiliency in that one zone, but the clouds only let you do 1 KMS key per region per vault. So you're still going to have to manage ever how many vault instances across ever how many regions you have, and you're going to have an unsealed key for each one. So you can imagine that starts to look like a janitor key ring, right? That's not something you want to deal with. Vault I think on its own allows you, if you did more of a replication strategy with Vault, would allow you to kind of centralize that key management while still using unseal. Without having to worry about, storing that key anywhere because you're replicating the key internally with Vault across environments.
All right, great. Says that I want to deploy Vault on-prem instead of cloud, so that cloud does not know our key.
Yeah, that's fine. You can just have Vault use Shamir. It doesn't have to use unseal. That's Vault's key. And even if you were using the cloud, it's still Vault's key. It's just like the master key shards are what the cloud helps you with. You can use Vault's. You can also use Vault with an HSM too. So if you had an HSM on premise and you wanted to actually integrate Vault with that, you could do that as well. But you definitely have the option to use Vault with or without an unsealed KMS key.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we move into the next part of the meeting? Nope. All right. Thank you so much, Josh. That was a good presentation. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Awesome, man.
Great. Now this is more of an informal part. We're finished with the presentations now. Now it's just a time for us to kind of interact with each other and learn more about HashiCorp tooling and the such. I know we kind of segued into Vault with some of the Q&A there. Michael, did you have something?
Not that differs from last time. So just the one story. Besides that, Vault's been a great product for me. So no, most of my woes come from Jenkins. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, that's the case then. Let's see if there's any other Q&A. Nope, I don't see anything. Oh, here we go. Same person is asking, do I need to select key value pair on option on Vault portal than if keys are stored outside the cloud?
One second, I'm trying to find mute. Gosh, Zoom. Do I need to select key value pair option on Vault portal? And if help me understand what you're asking there a little bit more. You need key value store for keys stored outside of Vault. Are you saying that you're trying to take?
No.
Yeah,
Sorry.
A little bit more context.
Is it audible? Hello?
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. My question is like, okay, like if I open the portal, the Vault portal, there are plenty of options there. Like one of the options was KV pair. And then I can see there's another option like Google Cloud. And then there is one more called Google Cloud. There are two options for Google Cloud as well. So I'm a bit confused, like, okay, which option should be the best option? If I'm storing the keys outside of Google Cloud, can I still select Google Cloud as an option there? Or else do I need to go with KV pair? So what option should I select there?
Okay, so KV pair is for static secrets. So if you have some secret, you basically just want to use Vault as essentially a copy paste store. You have some arbitrary text string that you just want to dump in it. That's what KV is for. If you're using Google-based credentials or something like that, like you have a service account or something like that, I would actually say you probably want to use dynamic secrets for that. It's more of an advanced use case, but the idea would be you have some credential that exists. Let's say it's my Terraform service account that lets me do all the God mode things that we've talked about. You have to be careful of and limit, right? So I can do that and feel a little bit better about it and have Vault dynamically generate a copy or clone or assumed role, if you will, of that service account and have it last for only as long as the job takes to run. Say it takes 10 minutes to run. That's as long as it lasts. So even if I got it afterwards, it wouldn't matter. I would say you want to move more towards dynamic secrets, but if you're just looking to just drop text or some type of external key into Vault, you use the KV store for that.
Okay.
Yeah, there are two. I see what you're talking about. There are two different engines for Google Cloud. Google Cloud is for resources being able to authenticate using Vault. So they can authenticate. Like say you've got either a compute instance or maybe you've got GKE or something like that, and those are governed by IAM, and so you can actually kind of use Vault as a way to extend the functionality of IAM, so that just like you use IAM to say you can access say blob storage. Well, now you can actually kind of bring Vault into that fold. So now with Google Cloud, just the plain Google Cloud, that resource is able to log in as a trusted identity without having to pass over any kind of credentials or anything like that, because now Vault has been brought into that and it knows about the permissions of IAM policies. The Google Cloud KMS is a different engine which allows you to manage the keys within Google's key management system. So you can revoke, you can rotate, you could do things like that. Probably less of a use case for you because most of those functionalities are already in Vault. And usually if you're going to use Vault as your primary key store for everything else, that's probably going to be your better place to do rotations like Josh was saying with dynamic secrets and things like that, which KMS doesn't offer. So primarily what you'd want to use is the Google Cloud for authentication. And then if you wanted to do, like Josh was saying about dynamic credentials in Google Cloud, that one doesn't have two Google Cloud options. So you just can dynamically generate the credentials for Google Cloud through the access identity.
Okay. My concern is like, Google can able to take our keys. For example, if they need to report to some agencies, external agencies, Google can able to access our keys if I use the Google option on the dashboard.
Give me an example. What do you mean?
Like for example, if something like any cloud provider can able to report if government is asking some details about our data, the cloud is liable to provide those information to the government, right? So we can't go and stop the cloud provider that you can't give any of my data to the government agencies. So always the cloud companies are permitted, okay, to use our data, to provide our data for any kind of enforcement agencies, for any kind of law actions, okay. So in that case, okay, I like to still protect my data without my permission. Any cloud provider can't access or can't give my data to the third-party systems. So that's the reason why, okay, I don't want to have any of my keys stored on the cloud. I want all my keys to stored, or else I want to install my Vault on-prem, okay, on premises. So that way, okay, I just want to use those keys on the Google Cloud for a temporary purpose to do some actions. So on Google Cloud, we'll never know, okay, what is the secret key, okay, at any point of time, unless I provide them. So that's my use case actually. Okay. So that is the case. What option should I select on the portal? Yeah. Should I go for KB pair, or else we discussed about two options for Google Cloud, right?
So
do you need to select any of those options?
Yeah, whichever case you're looking for, if you're concerned about cloud providers giving out information, then yeah, you would definitely want to store it, everything in Vault, which you can then in turn store in your own. If you have your own data center, you want to store it offsite from the cloud, you can do that. Josh, you have anything else you want to add?
My question is about in the selection, okay, on the portal, okay. So there are multiple options to select, right? So which option should I select so that way Google Cloud cannot be able to take my secret key, okay? at any cost.
So those are different options. Those are different options, and they do different things. So that when you're looking in, and I'll share my screen so that you can, so we're kind of on the same page here. Let's see here. Let me reshare that. Let's see here. Okay, so yeah, when you come over here, and let me collapse this bar here. Enable engine, yeah, so you've got, this is a standard generic key value store pair. So there's a whole bunch of different options here. Google Cloud over here, the one that I've got selected, is not for storing data. It's not for storing usernames and passwords. It's actually this one. Actually, this one is. I take it back. I think I got kind of. This one over here is the one for authentication methods. So this one over here, Josh, why don't you talk more about that one?
That's a good screen. I think it's helpful. Maybe it's helpful to look at, see the far left panel where it says generic cloud and infrastructure. I think what you're asking for is if you're looking for a tried and true generic way to store secrets in a way that is pretty much isolated to your system, key value store is what you're looking for. That would be a generic thing, right?
Yep.
If you're looking to generate secrets or leverage like identities and like leverage Google's KMS system, whether you're on-prem or not, then that's where a dynamic secret kind of comes into play, and that's where the cloud kind of plays. So I think we try to organize it in a way where it's easy to, to kind of find what you're looking for, but it can be confusing at times. But I think for your use case, if you're on-prem, you're going to be safe in the KV space.
Exactly. And yeah, and this one is not, like I said, it's not really to store data. This one's actually to generate dynamic credentials for the Google Cloud. So are these. So you don't actually store data in the cloud right here. This one you do. You can actually interface with KMS, but this one right here is for generating dynamic credentials for, say, an application or a user to log in. And so, yeah, Josh, like.
So then I can still go with KV pair, or else I can go with Google Cloud as well.
No, for your use case, like what Josh was saying, if you're going to store data, you want to store actual, usernames, passwords, things like that. KV is the only use case, whether you're in the cloud or not, doesn't matter. That is where you're going to store just standard usernames and passwords. This Google Cloud over here allows you to come in and say, hey, I need to log into Google. Right now, I need to log in. Let's just say I'm going to go to console.cloud.google.com, and I want to log in, but I don't have any credentials. This option right here allows an administrator to dynamically generate those credentials for you so that you can, say, have some credentials that last an hour, and now you can log in. You cannot use this to store any data. This is where you want to use, this is the engine that you want to use to store data with.
Okay. So the KV pair is the best option in it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So is this the Google Cloud one? Is this a secrets manager like the Google has recently launched? Is that the one?
This one interfaces with Google's KMS and allows you to kind of wrap in the auto rotation and things like that.
The other one.
Yeah, it's more of like an extension. It's not, this is, again, it's like we already have a lot of other things built in that it's better to use like what we have for auto rotation and things like that. You can totally use this if you want to. It's not used very often. It's usually only used for customers who are already heavily embedded in KMS. But when you're starting from scratch, we've got different things like the dynamic secrets down here for like databases, for RabbitMQ, and dynamic credentials for Active Directory and things like that Google KMS does not have and does not support. Same thing with like dynamic SSH credentials and things like that. So this one is kind of like it's there because it's there's a use case for it. Some several customers asked for it, so we've got it in there. But if you're going to be using other credentials, there's a whole lot of other engines that that are going to be a better choice for you. This is Google KMS is just a plain. It's not a whole lot different than KV. which means that it's not really anything that adds value to the ability to mitigate any kind of a breach or anything like that. You still have a key. Whereas dynamic secrets, let's just say your database secrets, you generate a dynamic secret and it lasts, let's say, for 15 minutes. Well, if somebody is able to gain access to those credentials, they only have 15 minutes from the time that they were generated until that account no longer exists. So you don't have that kind of mitigation with Google KMS or even, I know we don't have it on here, but even Azure Key Vault or AWS KMS, you don't have those kind of features where you can just say, you know what, these are short-lived credentials. If somebody gets it, we're going to do everything we can to make sure they don't. But if they do, they're not going to live around for a long time. And so that's why we recommend, not just because we're HashiCorp and we think Vault rules, but really just from a real, in terms of mitigation standpoint, just what really makes the most sense is let's have short-lived credentials. Let's use some of these other engines to generate credentials for us, rather than using some of the other kind of built-in, more for convenience type things with like KMS and Azure Key Vault. Anything else you want to add there, Josh?
No, that was good. I did want to kind of address the question regarding the Atlantis component. When you say Atlantis, I wasn't showing Atlantis. I was showing Terraform Enterprise. But Terraform Enterprise does support GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, and Azure DevOps in their respective enterprise versions.
Great.
Yeah, coming back to Vault, again, Vault got Enterprise Edition, right? So we need to still go with Enterprise, or else are we still happy to go with the open source?
Yep. There's an enterprise version of Vault. There is. It's geared, all the little things that you saw here. Here, I'll just share it again.
My question is, like, since it's on a live project, like on a financial project commitment, okay, shall we still take a risk of an open source for Vault, or else do we need to still or else do we need to go only with Enterprise Edition?
It depends on what your requirements are, especially for SLA, for compliance, things like that. For the financial industry, Vault Enterprise is probably more purchased than any other sector, aside from maybe HCA or things like that. And the reason for that is because Vault Enterprise offers FIPS 140-2 compliance, and you can do HSM integrate. Well, it requires HSM integration to get that level of compliance. But you also are able to replicate, and it's real-time replication. So you're not doing it in batches. As soon as changes are made, those changes are pushed out to a DR and or any kind of performance replicas that you have. So basically, when it comes to higher end true enterprisey type stuff, where you need number one, availability, you need compliance. You're not allowed to have any kind of downtime, regardless of whether location is important. That's where Vault Enterprise comes in. It also allows you a lot more management type tools, like with namespaces and things like that.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions HashiCorp related? We're now at the part of the meeting where we've finished our presentations, and now we're just talking HashiCorp. I think it was really cool to see both automation in the open source version and in the enterprise version. There was a lot of good things about both, and I thought it was a really good demo. I appreciate it. One more Q&A.
Do you recommend like any kind of lab exercises, like if we want to understand from basics? So do you recommend any good websites or good learning portals from Terraform to Vault
And
to
Struct.com, and I'm going to put this in the, I'll put this in the chat. Instruct.com/HashiCorp.
Instructs. Very good.
So I'll put this in the chat here, and there you go. So that gives you a lot of different things to play around with HashiCorp tools. So anywhere, Vault, Terraform, Nomad, Console. I think we even got Packer and Vagrant on there, don't we?
Yeah.
Cool. And of course, there's also learn.hashicorp.com. Both of those are good resources. I'll paste that one in there too.
Okay, so I got two websites from you. Okay, one is learn.hashicorp.com, and the second is play.instructyou.hashicorp. Two websites you recommend.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah, looks like Jackie posted that in there. So thanks, Jackie. We've got it in there twice now.
No problem. I saw it was the panelist. I was like, oh, I've done that. I'll just move it.
And there's also a ton of other blogs out there too, that especially on Medium, not only, our own team, we post things out there, but there's webinars, there's blogs that go over a little bit more specific use cases. So, a quick Google search can help turn up some of those as well. But those two main sites have material that's generated by us.
Yes, indeed. And there's the new certifications that just came out too for Terraform and Vault. Those are good ways to kind of give you a learning path towards learning the different tooling. And I found that the exam guides, even for someone who's used Terraform or Vault myself for a very long time, kind of gives you a directed path to just kind of validate your knowledge in each of the areas.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, anyone on the call, are you going to get your or already have any of the HashiCorp certifications? No one else, just me?
I think we're required to, so we're going to have to do it no matter what. But
yeah.
But,
Mike, you're not going to get yours?
I probably will. It just depends. I've got a lot of other stuff lined up.
Yeah, like
So
Ansible and Jenkins, right?
Yeah.
I just got the Terraform Associate one.
Nice. Good job, Ilan.
Yeah, I recommend it for people. I mean, it's not too challenging, and it's worthwhile if you have some Terraform experience.
Very cool.
Do we get any kind of phone support for the open source? Like if we're stuck with some problems, like we're not able to implement the solutions, do we get any kind of a support over the phone or emails, or else would it be just a community support?
With the open source, you're on your own, man.
Okay. So just a community support in this.
Yeah. So posted in the chat, we generally watch the forums at discuss.hashicorp.com. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post in there.
There we go. I couldn't find unmute, but I was like, oh, I can type fast and I can find this right now. Generally speaking, there's some of the engineering team and the DAs are monitoring this, as well as I think the education team. So we usually try to keep up to date with the issues and give responses back.
Cool.
Let's see here. I thought I saw a question come in. Nope, no questions.
Yeah, that's where did he post the links? And I was saying in the Zoom chat versus the Q&A. So it's not like in a Q&A answer. Yeah.
Yes, got it. Okay. Great. Any other questions or maybe even comments or maybe tales of woe if anyone has any?
Tales of
So we've been making the argument a lot for customers, who they may say, oh, well, why not just use ARM templates or, whatever the particular cloud provider already provides. And, we've got, a list of like 4 or 5 things. I mean, just that we think are the reason you'd want to get started on the right foot with Terraform, and the fact that it maintains state, the fact that you can look at your plan. If I want, mistype one letter in ARM and run the code again, it could destroy the whole environment. Where at least I'm going to get a chance to look at the plan and see exactly gets changed in Terraform, and the universality of it, the fact that I can sooner or later, even if you don't think you're going to go to 2 clouds, sooner or later you're going to be doing something in multiple clouds. And so I think that the fact that you're not going to have to learn another language and all that, you're already going to have to learn their products and their nomenclature and all that kind of stuff. So why make it more complicated for yourself to have to learn, whatever platform that they might be doing mass deployment stuff in. So, so those are a few things that we talk about quite a bit to our customers, and I'm completely convinced. So usually that's pretty convincing to them. I find.
Yeah. In addition, I think if you're just new to infrastructure as code, code generally does imply some sort of a language. JSON is not a language, it's structured data. YAML, even though it's like HTML, it says markup language in it, it's not a language, it's simply structured data. Just like a Microsoft Word document is structured information. It's not an actual language. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't allow you to, we've adjusted, especially like you look at the ARM templates, you look at CloudFormation, they've kind of jimmy rigged it to where you can put in, functions and things like that. But that's really not, you're doing it in a very awkward, strange way of doing it. It's not a language. I can't take the variables section of a CloudFormation template and move it down to the bottom. I get in trouble. So it's very rigid. It's a data format, data structure that you have to structure in a very specific and rigid way. All of them are the same way. So they're actually not languages. So when you think of infrastructure as code, none of them are code. None of them. They're actually just structured data. Terraform actually is infrastructure as code. It's true infrastructure as code. It's a declarative language. It does come with a few functions in there that help you work through logic. And so, when you kind of drill it down to what is actually infrastructure as code, Terraform is, the rest are not. So.
Right.
And adding on to that, also, you're going to have a lot better support generally, I found, at least with AWS. When AWS releases new stuff, usually the Terraform provider is updated the same day, if not already updated. Not always the case for GCP, but they'll have stuff faster than CloudFormation. CloudFormation will sometimes not get stuff for 6 months, and Terraform's going to have it.
Yeah, I witnessed that at AWS reInvent as things were announced. Terraform provider was also announced for that specific thing, or the Terraform resource was, and I was like, wow, that's same day support. That's amazing.
Yeah, like they released some new like some service discovery thing for Route 53, and ECS didn't support that for I think almost a year, and Terraform had it the same day. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah, and another point about different clouds and stuff like that using for Terraform. Terraform can also configure services and stuff like that as well. So things like Okta, for instance, if folks even keep like their DNS configuration as infrastructure as code. I know there's a Cloudflare provider for Terraform that I've used before.
Kubernetes.
Yeah, Kubernetes as well, especially the new Kubernetes controller. I really want to play more with that.
I mean, if we think about like hybrid interoping, right? I think a lot of times when we say the word hybrid, people are like, oh my God, you mean the big three? I'm never going to be in the big three. I'm only going to be married to my cloud forever. It's like, okay, whatever. use Cloudflare? Do you use the other pauses? Do you use the other IaaS? Like what you use other stuff, and your organization does too. I think what's really unique about Terraform as it gets developed more, open source or not, is that, you know, the future to me is DevOps is going to become more of a, I need to be able to work across these environments and across these tool sets, and I need to have something that can leverage all of them, right? Like, I think it's going to become like a new kind of part of the tool belt that you're just going to have to use and have to understand. So going back to the, you know, get your credentials as soon as possible, I think that's probably a pretty decent investment of your time.
Indeed, and finding the good patterns to manage that code at scale is important as well, and I feel like that's what this whole meeting was about today.
Yeah, one more question with respect to Vault. In fact, there are plenty of companies like third-party companies like Fortanix, for example. They provide external key manager. Like they come up with kind of a portal where, okay, they store the keys for us, and we need to just use their keys into the Google Cloud, for example. So they come up with fancy portals like where they supply, like for example, key rotation, and then they come up with all set of features as part of a monthly or yearly subscription. So just thinking like, okay, like what kind of tools or something, okay, they could have used. Okay, are they using something like maybe kind of open source tools, and then they just build up packages, and then they just give the subscription for the customers, or else they use some other languages as such, okay, to develop their products. Like, have you got any ideas like, okay, how these kind of products has been built, like what tools, what languages they use, by any sense?
I'm not sure I understand the question real well. Josh, did you catch it?
I was hoping you did. Maybe we can get like a repeat, or you kind of tailed off towards the end there. I wasn't sure if you were asking a question or.
Yeah, my question is about like, okay, there's a good competition. There are plenty of vendors who does the Vault in the market. Like for example, like, okay, like SKDMS, okay, like self-defending KMS, okay. So these kind of products, there are plenty in the market. Like for example, like Fortanix is one of the product. So they say that, okay, they store the key on their SaaS system, and we need to just use their keys and then put it into Google Cloud, and then they do rest of, for example, like rotating the keys. They do all the features out of the box for us, so we no need to write any code as such. Like for example, we need to develop the code, right? So we need to just pay for a subscription, and then they do rest everything for us. Okay, so just generate the key from the software, and then just put the key, okay, to the Google Cloud, and then use straight away. Okay, so those kind of features or products are available in the market. So the question is like, how good in the market? Okay, have you got any idea about it? Like, okay, our softwares or companies, okay, are still using those kind of products because it gives everything out of the box, pretty easy. Okay, not to write any code as such. Okay, just pay for it, take up a subscription, and then just use it straight away.
So right. So,
go ahead.
I was going to say, so HashiCorp products take a different approach, right? So, yes, you can write, you could do procedures like that. You can take a traditional approach, or an SDK approach, if you will, to generating keys from your particular product or whatever it may be. But to Josh's point that he made earlier, it's all about reducing that click ops, right? The clicking around in interfaces and stuff like that, and actually creating reproducible code. So I feel like Vault and the others kind of help you achieve that goal.
I think, and I like that segue. So if I were going to comment on that, I'd say this. It's like, I mean, if you like those types of tools and you want to do that, dude, go for it. You know, like the reality is I think kind of going back to Dan's question earlier is like, at what point do I start to consider a vault? I think you start to consider a vault when your people have fat fingered you enough times to where like now stuff's blowing up. Right? Like that's when you consider vault, because at some point pointing and clicking doesn't scale and pointing and clicking causes disaster. And so the idea is that having like some automated pipeline, which you could also make the argument that writing code is just as hard and difficult to maintain. I'd agree with you on that, but I would say that over time, as people get better and better and better, keep in mind, like, you know, the talent level gets better with more exposure to these tools and abstractions. I would say over time, ClickOps is going to lose. And I think that you're going to want more automated pipelines, like in your, you know, I guess your infrastructure or your internal systems, so that you can focus on other things. Like you're not going to want to be the guy that's like pointing and clicking when everybody's like, you know, abstracted that like, you know, 20 years ago.
But my concern is about the cost as well. Like, for example, like when I discussed with Vault Enterprise, I was given a quote about $50,000 as a starting price. And even it's going to cost me the same price if I go with the third-party vendors, because even they're going to charge about $5,000 per month or something. So it's going to be the cost-wise, it's going to be the same. In fact, okay, I no need to maintain any code. There is no need for a development. Just use the software assets and then just integrate the key directly into the GCP. So I'm trying to understand, like, okay, like how there should be a cost-wise at least a better, okay, when we do a development, because Terraform is something, it's just a code, right? We need to do a lot of development. But the same thing is when it's available out of full box where we can just use it, we're still paying the same cost. So that's where I'm struggling to understand, like, okay, how Terraform Enterprise is going to help us when compared with those ready-made solution providers.
I'll be honest with you, maybe it's not the solution for you, right? Like, you know, it's ultimately, if you're trying to understand who uses Vault or our tools, I've mentioned it before, like the people that use our tools are the ones that are looking for enterprise grade problems to solve, right? Me just needing a key that I can easily import into Google Cloud for a few resources is not an enterprise problem. Me needing to import thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of service accounts that are sprawled all across the world, and I need to do it in GCP, AWS, Azure, and God knows what else, plus on-prem and legacy, that's an enterprise problem. And at that point, people are going to pick Vault.
Okay. Maybe, okay. At that time, the cost may be higher, okay, with the third-party solutions as well.
Cool. Just in the interest of time, we are at 8 o'clock, so we're done with you know, if you need to jump off, feel free to jump off. We do have some additional Q&A questions if anybody wants to hang around, but don't feel an obligation to need to do so. I did want to just thank the speakers for today. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Ilan, for talking about Terraform. And our next Hug meeting will be on May 27th. So we're doing the last Wednesday of every month. So we hope to see you at the next Hug. Thank you so much. And again, we'll try to answer the Q&A here in the overtime section of our Atlanta Hug.
See you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
I gotta eat this food that's
I think it's not published on I think it's not published on Meetup. I think the next meeting it's not live on Meetup.
Yeah, it will be soon. Just keep an eye on the Atlanta meetup, and we will send an email out to everybody once it's available.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Kana. Okay, so yeah, let's see if we can tackle any of these questions. Just here at the end. So the first question is, can we write Terraform code in YAML or JSON? Well, that's kind of antithetical, or what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of against what Kevin was saying earlier. You know, usually use HashiCorp configuration language, HCL, to write Terraform. While Terraform can support JSON in a way, it's kind of an anti-pattern. So
I can
yeah,
join in here.
yeah. Feel
I've
free to
done
join in.
both.
Yes.
It was terrible to do JSON.
Oh yeah.
You can do it. I can't remember exactly why. I did that at my last job, and what ended up happening was that it just hurt a lot. I wouldn't really recommend it. I went from HCL first to JSON after, and I wish I could remember the pain points. It just really hurt. It was a lot more difficult. I think we had issues with like getting things into the right levels and parsing properly. It was more of a headache than it was worth.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine.
It was not an enjoyable experience.
All right. The next question is, Microsoft uses Azure Key Vault internally for the service managed keys while configuring your own keys called customer managed keys. Okay, well, that's a statement. But thank you for letting us know about that, Christopher. Very good. Next, there's no way to know what other third parties are using unless they are public about what they use because it's typically proprietary. Well, that's true. That's the one of the byproducts of being in the public cloud. Great talk. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Vijaya. That was a response to comments question. Okay, yes. Last question, talking about Terraform best practices, how long should a typical Terraform production grade code take? Ballpark figure. I was asking to compare my code run time so I know if I need to optimize. What I have is taking around 20 minutes running for my local system. Somebody want to answer that? I don't have a good answer for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a right answer for that. I mean, if you want to think about what Terraform is kind of designed for, what it's meant to do is in your pipeline. Basically, you're looking at the infrastructure, you're looking at blast radius. So however big that blast radius is that you deem to manage, that can take quite a long time. I mean, if you're going to spin up, 4 EKS clusters and you want to manage it that way, you also want to spin up an RDS database, and then you want to spin up, 20 different EC2 instances. That's going to take a long time. And but generally speaking, and some of those resources just take longer. For instance, Azure is notoriously and significantly slower to provision and destroy resources than the other clouds are. AWS is probably mediocre. Google's a little bit faster, but nonetheless, it just really depends on the size and the resources involved. So let's just take DynamoDB table takes a second to create. An RDS instance can take 8 to 12 minutes to create, just to create it, and so it's kind of a hard question to answer. EC2 instances, if I'm just going to spin up a plain EC2 instance, and it'll usually, I think it can go up to like 4 to 6 different threads that it can actually launch and manage the instances you're spinning up. And I've actually spun up, 6 to 7 instances, and it can be done in a matter of like 2 to 3 minutes. So it's a combination of how of the types of resources that you have, along with how many you have in and of itself. RDS, EKS, those are definitely time consumers. So hopefully that answers the question. Like I said, there's not really a straight answer on that one, but that's generally the rule of thumb.
Indeed. Yeah, I would have to second that answer. I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Another question, have we got any code quality check tools for Terraform code, like how SonarQube works for several languages? The one that comes to mind first is TFLint. So I'll link that there. That's just a linter that's, you could get different possible errors and best practices kind of in your IDE as you code Terraform. The other one that I looked up, and I haven't used yet, but I've heard of people using, is TerraScan. And I just linked that there in GitHub as well. That is a collection of security and best practice tests for static code analysis of Terraform templates. So it ensures things like encryption, security groups, public exposure logging and monitoring. So I would look into that. And then another one that I haven't used, but I've also heard of people using is called Checkoff. So checkoff.io. And this one is, again, just preventing those misconfigurations during build time. So while you run your Terraform code, before you apply it, it will block if it detects any cloud misconfiguration. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions, and I think we're good here. Thank you guys for sticking around.
Yeah,
And
thanks for attending, everyone. Thanks to our sponsors / hosts for setting this up and running it. Thank you very much, guys.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Thank you guys. See y'all later.
See ya.